The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Chris Thurber, and I am going to spend the next 20 minutes teaching you how to make a great questionnaire. This webinar is brought to you by Expert Online Training. It is 20 minutes long, just long enough for you to squeeze in something really fun before your lunch, and it's called the Ideal Questionnaire. Just a word or two about the work that I do, and we'll click to the next slide here. I work with schools and camps, and I'm also a researcher. So as a clinical psychologist working at Phillips Exeter Academy, I teach a psychology class. I see students for psychotherapy, and I also do some committee work and faculty development workshops. I also do a great deal of work with camps, which is both year-round and seasonal, specializing in aquatics and dining services and outdoor education. And my research has focused on homesickness, behavior problems, mental health issues at camp, and I'm proud to say that I was part of a research project funded by the American Camp Association on the outcomes of the camp experience. Whether you work at a camp or a school or a Parks and Rec department or another summer youth program, you'll be interested in the content of this webinar because we all want to know what our participants think. So I'll tell you one thing about our sponsor, which I feel very proud of. Expert Online Training is a library of more than 100 10-minute videos, each accompanied by a quiz and a handout that you can use to complement the wonderful on-site training that you do. If you're like most directors of summer youth programs, you don't feel that there's enough time with your staff on-site to cover everything that either the accreditation standards or your own personal high standards necessitate. Expert Online Training has a faculty of more than 24 experts ranging from pediatricians to attorneys to camp directors to nurses. And what we do is divide our content into the 6 categories of leadership, youth development and play, mental health and behavior, physical and emotional safety, supervision, and creative literacy. And in those 6 categories, you'll be able to find wonderful content for new staff, returning staff, program specialists, and your senior supervisory staff. The subscriptions are year-round, and you can see full-length sample videos if you visit expertonlinetraining.com. Youth Inspired is one of my favorites. It's one of the samples. And when you're ready, give us a call toll-free, 877-237-3931, and we'll be happy to set you up with a live demo, give you a temporary username and password so that you can tour the site and think about all the wonderful ways this online self-paced program can complement the on-site work that you do with your staff. Now let's talk about questionnaires. Why collect data in the first place? When I did my dissertation on homesickness, I decided that I would ask a few questions that had nothing at all to do with homesickness, but that would teach the camp something about the programs it was running. I thought this would be a wonderful way to do a service to the camp at the same time I complete my dissertation. So I asked in the questionnaire that the kids filled out after being at camp for 24 hours, and I'll say that I completed this work both at a resident boys camp as well as a resident girls camp, and parenthetically found no differences among the data. But here was the question that really surprised me. I asked on that questionnaire, what's the best thing that's happened in the first 24 hours that you've been here? And what's the worst thing that's happened in the first 24 hours? And I thought perhaps there would be some predictive nature to these questions. Maybe they would have something to do with kids' adjustment to the separation from home. But what I didn't anticipate was that my program area, the waterfront, would be dramatically maligned by about 90% of the kids. They all said, almost all of them, that the worst thing that had happened so far to them since their arrival at camp had been doing the dock test. And most of you who run day and resident programs or have an aquatics element at your camp know that you need to assess kids' swimming abilities. But when I formed focus groups with the campers and asked them, what is it that you really dislike about the dock test, I found out the following things. First, this was their initial experience at camp, and it was an evaluative one, and so it felt a little bit harsh. Second, they had to do this dock test, swimming 50 yards and treading water and putting on a life jacket in the water in front of their parents because their parents wanted to hang out after dropping them off and see how they performed. Third, they had to change clothes, that is to say, get naked in front of people that they didn't know in their first 10 minutes at camp. So after waiting in a long registration line, they then had to go through a series of pretty uncomfortable experiences in order to get placed in one of the swim groups. Having discovered this, which I never would have done unless I'd been interested in collecting data in the first place, I did a lot of things which have made this experience much better for kids. First of all, it doesn't need to happen in the first few hours. We can do it the next morning. Second, we don't need to call it a dock test. We can call it a swim check. Third, it's not happening in front of the parents. Why? Because we push it up to the next morning. And finally, the initial experience being at camp is not changing your clothes and being evaluated, but rather ongoing games that kids can join in as they arrive at camp. And so this was an important lesson for me in collecting data and learning things that you would never know unless you asked. Soccer is something that is a worldwide favorite, and if you look at this photo, I wouldn't know whether these kids are enjoying this soccer game. Maybe this is happening at a day camp or Parks and Rec program. Maybe it's happening at an overnight camp. The point is, unless you ask, you wouldn't know whether something is an enjoyable experience, too competitive, aversive in some way. So I hope I've convinced you in the first few minutes here that data collection is essential. So there are 3 steps to creating a wonderful questionnaire that is both reliable and valid. The first is to take stock. You want to ask yourself, what's the question or questions that we want to answer? Next, whom are you going to give the survey to? Are you giving this survey to parents? Are you giving it to grandparents? Are you giving it to your young participants? You want to give a version of the survey to the staff. So when you start with what is it that we'd like to discover, the next question is, well, whom are you going to survey? Next, how are you going to get them to complete it? Are you offering an incentive? Do you want them to do something? Are you just hoping that out of the goodness of their heart they'll complete it? And how will that affect the return rates? Next, how long is it going to take to gather the data? Are you going to carve a little time at a rest hour? Are you going to mail it out and give people a week to send it back? Will it be electronic? And if that's the case, how will you prevent it from going into their spam box? Next, is everyone okay with this? Does your camp have a board of directors, and have you cleared it through them? Is there a parent or umbrella organization that needs to know about your collecting data, and is everyone okay with that? So be sure you clear it with folks. And finally, bonus question for taking stock. Think about who's going to enter and analyze the data. This is a time-consuming process that requires somebody to sit at a keyboard or scan it in or something, but you got to think ahead about that. That's step 1. Step 2 is to choose your question type, and I'm going to go through 5 or 6 different question types. The first is open-ended. Here's an example of an open-ended question. We might be interested in assessing how much people like soccer in the photo I showed you earlier. So we could ask an open-ended question like, what's the best thing that's happened so far? One of the advantages of open-ended questions is you get a wide range of responses, and that yields very rich data. A downside that's time-consuming is that you have to code the answers in order to analyze them. So is there a difference between a kid who says soccer and a kid who says football? If he's from a different country, maybe that's the way he referred to it. Have you thought ahead about that? How are you going to code these open-ended responses? So think ahead about the time it might take to code an open-ended response before you include those on your questionnaire, and understand that the richest data come from these kinds of open-ended questions. Very much akin to the one I asked, what's the best thing that's happened since you arrived a day ago, and what's the worst thing that's happened since you arrived a day ago? You're going to get some surprising answers, and I would encourage that I would encourage all of you to include open-ended questions, some of them, on your questionnaire. Next is a closed-ended question. Here's an example of a closed-ended question. Is soccer your favorite activity? Check yes or no. As you can imagine, the narrow range of responses here makes the data very precise, and it's a time saver because you can analyze the data very quickly. You'll have to ask separate questions about each activity or each topic in which you're interested in, and that can result in a very long questionnaire. So be precise in your questions and think about exactly what you want to analyze. A big mistake most people make when they design a questionnaire is that it's too long because they're interested in so many questions. Focus and think about what you want to answer first. People have also heard of Likert scales, and this is a scale of agree or disagree, and it's named after the researcher who made them up. Here's an example. Soccer is fun. Circle one answer. Strongly disagree, somewhat agree, strongly agree. This is the classic Likert scale, and you usually see it spread out along a single line. A nice thing about Likert scales is that you get a sort of medium range of responses or provide some variety. It's not open-ended, but it's also not simply yes or no. You're going to get a variable that ranges at least along 4 points. And you can analyze this data fairly quickly. That's a time saver. Again, separate questions about each thing you're interested in may result in a long questionnaire unless you're careful to focus on the questions that are most important to you. Next is a numerical rating scale. This is one of my personal favorites. I like an 11-point scale because I think 0 to 10 is intuitive. We rate a lot of things 0 to 10. So here's an example of a numerical rating scale. How much fun is soccer? 0 would be terrible, 10 would be excellent, 5 would be so-so, and you have some numbers there in between. If you like these numerical rating scales, be happy to know that you get a wide range of quantifiable data. And if you do any inferential statistics, that is testing a hypothesis of how one group feels versus how another group feels, when you have a range of quantifiable data here, you fulfill the assumptions that those inferential statistics require. So if all of that sounded like gobbledygook, let me say it in a simpler way. A range of numbers is a good thing when you go to generate statistics. You do need what are called semantic anchors for this to be reliable. So notice that I have some adjectives that describe what a 0 means and what a 10 means and what a 5 means. You could spread the scale out and add a few more semantic anchors to describe what a 2 or 3 or a 7 or 8 mean, but you need to have some words that describe the number so that everyone's on the same page. And again, you'll have to ask individual questions about individual topics. I'll add here that if you ask versions of the same question, you get higher reliability. You would expect someone to answer the same thing for how much fun is soccer as they would answer how much fun is it to run around on the field and kick a ball, or how much fun do you have being outside running around. Those are going to generate similar responses. And then you can do frequency ratings. In the last week, how many times have you chosen to go to a soccer period? And the person fills in the blank. Advantages here, you get a really wide range of quantifiable data, again, generating good statistics, because some people will have gone not at all, some people have gone 3 or 4 times, but it does require some assumptions about the answer. In other words, how many times have you chosen to go to a soccer period? We're saying that that's a proxy for liking soccer. However, the weather may have been excellent and there may have been no wind, and that's why the person chose not to go to a sailing period, but soccer was kind of far down on their list. They just did it because there wasn't their favorite activity available. So you have to assume some things about what the number means. And again, separate questions can generate a long questionnaire. You see how many times I'm cautioning you about not doing that. And finally, the third step is to check for flaws. Once you have decided what you want to ask about and you've thought about how you're going to distribute the questionnaire, who's going to enter the data, how it's going to be analyzed, you've double checked with your board of directors or your parent organization or the other senior staff at camp that it's okay, you've figured out a way to incentivize it, you've given yourself a timeline, and then you've decided on what kind of question or what variety of questions you want to ask. The final step is to check for flaws in the design. I want to pause here and let everybody know that there's a downloadable PDF that accompanies this webinar, so I hope none of you are writing furiously or feeling overwhelmed. All of the content I'm covering is summarized for you on that questionnaire. Here are the questions you need to ask in order to check for flaws in your design. First, are my directions clear? I've designed questionnaires with some ambiguous directions and the data then become contaminated because people didn't understand exactly what they were supposed to do on the questionnaire. A great way to know whether the directions are clear is to print out a couple copies of the questionnaire and give them to a few kids or a few parents or a few board members, whoever you're surveying, and don't say anything to them, just say, please fill this out. And then when they're done, ask them, was it clear, was the questionnaire clear, did you know what you were supposed to be doing and how you were supposed to fill this out? In other words, pilot test your questionnaire. Second, is the length bearable? Another advantage to pilot testing the questionnaire is you're going to sort of figure out, gosh, when you sat at your desk and tried to estimate how long this questionnaire was, you thought it would take about 10 minutes. It took most 10-year-olds 25 minutes, and then they got all resentful that it took time out of their favorite activity, or the staff were late to their next period, or whatever it might be. So lots of reasons why you need to know that the length is bearable. And if you do a questionnaire online, what you need to do, again, is pilot it and give people a sense, use an online questionnaire vendor that gives participants a little thermometer or progress bar of where they are in filling out the questionnaire. So it might say at the beginning, this questionnaire has 20 questions, and then at the bottom it would say, you're 7 questions into the 20, 2 more minutes left to go, or this is your progress. But make sure that the overall length is bearable. Are the questions worded well? Remember, when you go to analyze the data, you can't go back and ask someone, what did you mean when you filled this out? Or what did you mean when you circled a 6? Or you said yes, but later on you contradicted yourself when you said no to a similar question. So have somebody who understands your organization but has nothing at all to do with your questionnaire design review it with you to make sure that the questions are worded well. Next, do items have social desirability? That is to say, are you wording the question in a way that pulls for a certain answer? You wouldn't want to phrase a soccer-related question like this. Most kids really love soccer. Do you? Because that suggests that there is a right kind of answer. Or kids who are very popular and athletic tend to like field sports. How much do you like soccer? On a scale from 0 to 10. How much do you like lacrosse on a scale from 0 to 10? If you preface the answers by giving your participants some notion of what the right answer would be or what the cool answer would be, then you've contaminated the data. And finally, will the questions yield the data you want? This is really a question about validity. Are you measuring what you're setting out to measure? Or did the question ask something that is actually an indicator of a variable you don't care about? One of the best ways to check for flaws is pilot the questionnaire with a small group, enter the data into the computer, go through the whole process that you would go through in analyzing the data, and then go back and revise it. Another excellent way besides piloting is have someone who doesn't have anything to do with the organization read the questionnaire and give you some feedback. And finally, is the planned sample representative? If you plan to survey 25 parents, where are you getting them from? And are those 25 parents representative of the 1,000 parents that come through your organization each year, or are they just the ones you know well? And when you get a low response rate, for example, you've sent out the questionnaire to all 1,000 parents, but you only get back 50 questionnaires, you have to ask yourself, well, who was it that filled it out? Did we get some older parents and some younger parents? Did we get some parents of first-year participants as well as veteran participants? And in that case, we would say that is a small sample size, but it's fairly representative. Or did you only get questionnaires back from those parents who really know you well, or those parents whose kids are 14 and 15 years old? The larger sample you have, the less you need to worry about whether or not it's representative. So beware of very tiny samples. Do the best you can to cast a broad net, but always ask questions about the person's background, such as age and address. Even if you're not asking names and you want to keep it semi-anonymous, it's important to know that you have a representative sample. Once you've got all the data, you're going to enter, you're going to analyze it, and present your results with pictures. Now, a graph is a pretty good picture. Here's just kind of a sample graph. That's nice. It's a good visual. Even better would be something that actually draws people in. This is a really cool graphic of the percentage of energy that's returned to a ball after one bounce. And in case you didn't know, bouncing a steel ball on a steel plate returns 98% of the energy. Tennis ball, only 15% of the energy. But isn't this a cool way to represent those data? Whatever findings you get, don't fall victim to the file drawer problem, which is that you're keeping all the data to yourself because you didn't think it would be interesting to anyone else, even if you didn't prove your hypothesis. Even if the results were surprising, share them because it's going to teach you something about your organization. You're going to learn from your data and your questionnaire, and as you can see here, you won't know unless you ask. These two kids look pretty happy to be leaving that program or to be arriving at that program, but I want to know more because my investment in my program means continuous professional development and improvement of program, and I'm going to get the most candid feedback on how well I'm delivering my product by asking the participants and those around them. That was 20 minutes of intensive questionnaire design. I want to say thank you on behalf of the entire Expert Online Training team. And I want to encourage you to join us for October's Flash webinar. Finally, I'll say that this webinar will be recorded. If you know a friend who would benefit from this presentation, you can visit expertonlinetraining.com and you'll be able to find on our blog post or on our webinar page a recording of this. And I wish you a wonderful fall season. See you in October for next month's Flash webinar.